He helped a trapped Bigfoot escape. Next morning, police from 3 states surrounded his property. The screams tore through the October darkness like nothing Marcus Webb had ever heard in 18 years of patrolling these Oregon forests. It was 2:17 in the morning when the sound first reached him, a desperate wailing that seemed to vibrate through the ancient Douglas firs surrounding his truck. Marcus killed the engine and stepped into the frigid air, his breath forming clouds in the unseasonable cold that had settled over the Mount Hood National Forest like a suffocating blanket. The sound came again. Not a bear, though Marcus had heard plenty of those in distress. Not an elk, despite the similarity in the guttural undertones. Definitely not human, yet there was something disturbingly familiar in those cries, something that spoke of intelligence and terror in equal measure. Marcus Webb was 42 years old, a veteran ranger who had seen mountain lions take down deer, witnessed the aftermath of poaching operations, and once tracked an injured hiker through a blizzard for 16 hours straight. He was not a man given to flights of imagination or supernatural thinking, but standing there in the darkness, listening to those impossible sounds echoing through the wilderness, he felt the hair on his neck stand rigid. Protocol dictated he call for backup, radio in the disturbance, wait for additional rangers, approach any potentially dangerous situation with proper support. Marcus reached for his radio, thumb hovering over the transmit button. Then the screaming intensified, taking on a quality of such pure agony that his hand fell away. Whatever was making that sound was dying, slowly, terribly, and it was alone. Marcus grabbed his high-powered flashlight and emergency kit from the truck bed. He had worked this territory his entire adult life, knew every trail and game path, every seasonal creek bed and rocky outcropping. The cabin where he lived sat just 12 miles from here, a solitary structure he had called home since his divorce 7 years ago. People in town called him a hermit. Marcus preferred to think of himself as someone who understood that some kinds of peace could only be found in isolation. The sounds led him northeast, deeper into a section of forest that few rangers ventured into regularly. The terrain grew increasingly hostile, thick underbrush giving way to rocky slopes and fallen timber that made progress treacherous in the darkness. Marcus moved with practiced efficiency, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, following both the intermittent cries and signs of disturbance in the vegetation. Something large had passed this way recently, breaking branches at a height that made Marcus's stomach tighten with apprehension. 40 minutes into his pursuit, the screaming stopped abruptly. Marcus froze, straining to hear anything in the sudden silence. Then came a different sound, labored breathing, heavy and wet, punctuated by low moans that spoke of exhaustion and resignation. Marcus pushed through a final wall of brush and emerged into a small clearing. His flashlight beam found it immediately. The creature was massive, easily 8 feet tall, even in its crouched position. Dark fur covered its entire body, matted and filthy, catching the light in a way that suggested both solidity and impossible presence. But what locked Marcus in place, what made his rational mind stumble and restart like a failing engine, was the creature's leg, caught in the cruel steel jaws of an industrial bear trap, the kind of sophisticated equipment that had no business being in a national forest, the kind that could crush bone like kindling. The creature's head turned toward Marcus, and their eyes met. Marcus had looked into the eyes of countless animals during his career. He understood the blankness of a deer's gaze, the calculating intelligence of a predator, the simple fear response of injured wildlife. This was different. The eyes that stared back at him held something that transcended animal awareness. There was intelligence there, recognition, and a pleading desperation that bypassed language entirely and struck directly at something primal in Marcus's chest. The creature made a sound, softer now, almost questioning. Its massive hand, so human in structure yet so alien in proportion, gestured weakly toward the trap. The meaning was unmistakable. Help me. Marcus's training screamed at him to retreat, to call this in, to let professionals handle whatever this situation was. But even as those thoughts formed, he was moving forward, setting down his flashlight to angle it properly, pulling tools from his emergency kit. The creature watched him approach, its breathing rapid and shallow, but it did not try to flee or attack. Instead, it seemed to understand that Marcus represented its only chance. As Marcus knelt beside the trap, examining the mechanism in the inadequate light, he noticed details that sent ice through his veins. This was not some poacher's crude setup. The trap was military grade with serial numbers that had been carefully filed away. A destroyed camera system lay nearby, sophisticated equipment that suggested organized operation rather than opportunistic hunting. Someone had set this deliberately in a remote location with the specific intention of catching something large and unusual. The creature made another sound, this one almost gentle, as Marcus's fingers found the release mechanism. He looked up into those impossible eyes again and made a decision that he knew, with absolute certainty, would change everything that came after. He was going to free it. Subscribe to hear what happens when Marcus makes an impossible choice that will bring the full force of government secrecy crashing down on his isolated life. Marcus's hands trembled as he gripped the trap's release mechanism, feeling the cold metal resist his initial pressure. The creature's breathing had become more labored, each exhale producing a visible cloud in the frigid October air. He could smell it now, a musky scent that reminded him of wet earth and cedar, mixed with the copper tang of blood. The trap had been clamped around the creature's lower leg for what Marcus estimated must be hours, possibly even days based on the swelling he could see beneath the matted fur. The mechanism was more complex than any trap Marcus had encountered in his 18 years of ranger work. It required simultaneous pressure on 3 separate points, a design clearly intended to prevent accidental release or interference by the captured animal. As Marcus positioned his hands carefully, he noticed the creature watching his movements with an intensity that went beyond mere animal observation. Its eyes tracked each adjustment of his fingers, and when Marcus paused to reposition his grip, the creature made a low vocalization that sounded almost like encouragement. Marcus applied pressure gradually, feeling the springs resist with industrial strength. His muscles strained against the mechanism, sweat forming despite the cold. The creature remained perfectly still, as if understanding that any movement might disrupt Marcus's efforts. The trap's jaws had penetrated through fur and into flesh, and Marcus could see where blood had dried in dark patches around the wound. The injury was severe, but his quick assessment suggested no major arteries had been severed. The creature had been lucky in that regard, though luck seemed a strange word to apply to something caught in such a deliberate snare. The first release point gave way with a metallic click that echoed through the clearing. The creature's breathing quickened, and Marcus felt its massive hand hover near his shoulder, not touching but present, as if ready to steady him. He shifted his weight, repositioning to access the second mechanism while maintaining pressure on the first. His fingers ached from the cold and the strain, but he pushed harder, feeling the second spring begin to compress under his grip. Then, everything went wrong. The trap shifted suddenly as the second mechanism released, and the third point sprang back with violent force. Marcus jerked his hand away instinctively, but he was too slow. The steel edge caught his glove, tearing through the fabric and grazing his palm. He gasped, more from surprise than pain, and started to pull back completely to reassess. The creature moved with shocking speed for something so injured. Its massive hand shot out, not toward Marcus but toward the trap itself, catching the mechanism before it could reset completely. The creature held the partially open jaws steady, its arm trembling with effort, while making a series of urgent sounds that clearly meant for Marcus to continue. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, Marcus understood something that would haunt him forever. This being was not only intelligent, but possessed a capacity for selfless action. Despite its own agony, it was protecting him from harm. Marcus didn't hesitate. He repositioned immediately, found the third release point, and applied every ounce of strength he possessed. The creature maintained its grip on the trap's jaws, and together they fought against the mechanism's brutal design. Marcus's injured hand left blood smears on the cold metal, mixing with the creature's own blood in a strange communion of shared suffering. The final mechanism surrendered with a deep, satisfying click. The trap's jaws sprang open, and the creature pulled its leg free with a sound that was part relief, part pain. It collapsed backward onto the forest floor, chest heaving, cradling its injured limb with both hands. Marcus fell back as well, his own breathing ragged, his hands cramping from the exertion. For several long moments, they simply existed in that space together, two beings who had just accomplished something that transcended the normal boundaries of their respective worlds. Marcus expected the creature to flee immediately. Every instinct of survival should have driven it to disappear into the darkness, to put distance between itself and this human who represented both salvation and potential threat. Instead, The creature remained where it had fallen, its eyes never leaving Marcus's face. It shifted its weight slowly, testing the injured leg, and Marcus could see the damage more clearly now. The flesh was torn and badly bruised, but the bone appeared intact. With rest and time, it would heal. The creature made a sound, lower and more complex than before, almost like speech compressed into a register that human vocal cords could never reproduce. It reached out with one massive hand, moving with deliberate slowness, and touched Marcus's shoulder. The contact was gentle, impossibly gentle for something so large and powerful. Marcus felt the weight of that hand, the warmth of it through his jacket, and understood that he was being thanked in a way that required no translation. The creature struggled to its feet, favoring the injured leg but managing to stand. It was even larger upright, towering over Marcus in a way that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. It looked down at him for a long moment, then reached out again, this time touching the side of Marcus's face with the back of its hand. The gesture was so human, so filled with emotion, that Marcus felt his throat tighten. Then, the creature turned and limped toward the tree line. It moved surprisingly quickly despite its injury, its form disappearing into the shadows within seconds. But it paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back over its shoulder. Its eyes caught Marcus's flashlight beam one final time, reflecting gold and green, and then it was gone, leaving only disturbed vegetation and blood-stained ground as evidence it had ever existed. Marcus remained in the clearing as dawn began to break through the canopy above, his hands still shaking, his mind trying to process what had just occurred. He knew with absolute certainty that his life had just divided into before and after this moment, and that nothing would ever be quite the same again. Marcus stumbled back to his truck as the first rays of genuine sunlight pierced the forest canopy, painting everything in shades of amber and gold that seemed almost obscene in their normalcy. His legs moved mechanically, carrying him along the path he'd taken hours earlier, but everything felt different now. The forest that had been his domain for 18 years suddenly seemed like foreign territory, a place where the rules he'd spent his entire career learning had been revealed as incomplete, perhaps even deliberately misleading. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the rescue was draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made his vision blur at the edges. His hands, still cramping from their battle with the trap mechanism, trembled as he gripped branches for support. The cut on his palm where the mechanism had caught him throbbed with each heartbeat, a persistent reminder that what had happened was undeniably real. Marcus found himself touching his shoulder repeatedly, the spot where the creature had placed its hand, as if he could still feel the weight and warmth of that impossible contact. When he finally reached his truck, Marcus collapsed against the driver's side door, his breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He caught his reflection in the side mirror and barely recognized himself. His face was scratched from branches, his eyes were wild, and his uniform was covered in dirt, blood, and something else. Marcus looked down at his jacket and froze. Coarse dark hair clung to the fabric, dozens of strands that were clearly not from any animal he'd encountered in nearly 2 decades of ranger work. The hair was thick, almost wire-like, ranging from deep brown to black with hints of gray. He collected several strands carefully, placing them in an evidence bag from his emergency kit with hands that shook so badly it took 3 attempts. His phone. Marcus pulled it from his pocket, the screen cracked from when he'd fallen earlier, and scrolled through his photos with growing disbelief. He'd taken pictures. He didn't even remember doing it consciously, but his hands had apparently worked on autopilot, documenting what his mind could barely comprehend. The images were dark and grainy, taken in poor light with shaking hands, but they showed disturbed ground, the massive trap, and in one shot, a blurred but unmistakable form that was too large, too bipedal, too wrong to be anything his training had prepared him for. Marcus sat in his truck for 20 minutes, just breathing, before he could trust himself to drive. His mind kept circling back to the same impossible fact. He'd just freed something that wasn't supposed to exist, something intelligent, something that had communicated gratitude and protected him from harm, something that had looked at him with eyes that held unmistakable awareness and emotion. The drive back to the encounter site in full daylight took on the quality of a fevered compulsion. Marcus knew he should report the illegal trap, should follow protocol, should call his supervisor. Instead, he found himself parking in a different location and hiking back through the forest with his documentation kit, his camera, and a growing sense that he was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. The clearing looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, but the evidence of what had occurred was overwhelming. The trap lay open where they'd left it, its jaws spread wide, blood staining the metal teeth. Marcus photographed it from every angle, noting details he'd missed in the darkness. The trap was sophisticated, military-grade equipment with a pressure plate mechanism that would have required significant force to trigger. Serial numbers that should have been stamped into the metal had been carefully filed away, leaving only smooth indentations. But it was what Marcus found attached to a nearby tree that made his blood run cold. A camera system, expensive and weatherproof, had been mounted to capture whatever triggered the trap. The camera's housing had been smashed recently and violently with a force that had bent the metal mounting bracket. Marcus examined the damage and realized the creature must have destroyed it, either before or after being caught. Fragments of circuit board and lens glass littered the ground beneath the tree. Someone had set this trap specifically. Someone with resources and knowledge had placed military-grade equipment in a restricted area of national forest, equipped it with surveillance, and waited for something to walk into it. This wasn't poaching. This was hunting with precision and purpose. Marcus spent 2 hours documenting everything. He measured the footprints he found, massive impressions in the soft earth that measured 17 inches long and 7 inches wide at their broadest point. He collected blood samples from the trap and the surrounding area, labeling each carefully. He photographed the broken vegetation, the gouges in the earth where the creature had struggled, the disturbed pattern of forest floor that told a story of hours of desperate attempts to escape. As he worked, Marcus became increasingly aware of a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched. He'd experienced it countless times in the wilderness, usually just before spotting a deer or elk observing him from cover, but this felt different, more intense, almost oppressive. He caught himself scanning the tree line repeatedly, looking for movement that never quite materialized. When Marcus finally loaded the trap into his truck bed, using a tarp to avoid contaminating it further, he found something that made him stop cold. A note, placed under his windshield wiper, written on plain white paper in block letters that revealed nothing about the writer's identity. Forget what you saw. Some discoveries aren't meant to be shared. Marcus looked around the empty forest road, his heart hammering. Someone had been here while he was working the scene. Someone had watched him document everything and had taken the time to leave a warning. The isolation he'd always found peaceful suddenly felt threatening. Marcus drove back to the ranger station with the note burning in his pocket, his mind racing through implications he didn't want to face. The warning wasn't from some concerned hiker or fellow ranger worried about his safety. This came from whoever had set that trap, whoever had been watching and waiting in the forest. They knew what he'd found, and they wanted him silent. The next 3 days became a masterclass in paranoia that Marcus couldn't shake no matter how much he tried to rationalize it away. On Tuesday morning, he spotted an unmarked black SUV parked on Forest Road 2618, a route that saw maybe 2 vehicles per week. The SUV's windows were tinted beyond legal limits, and though Marcus slowed his patrol truck as he passed, he couldn't see inside. The vehicle remained stationary, its engine running, exhaust visible in the cold morning air. When Marcus circled back 20 minutes later, it was gone, but he found fresh tire tracks and cigarette butts that were still warm to the touch. Wednesday brought hikers who didn't hike like hikers. Marcus encountered them on the Ridge Trail, a moderately difficult path that attracted serious outdoor enthusiasts. These 3 men wore expensive technical gear that looked fresh from the store, boots so new they squeaked, and carried equipment that seemed wrong for casual hiking. One had what appeared to be a handheld radio scanner, another carried a camera with a telephoto lens that belonged on a safari, not a Pacific Northwest trail. They asked Marcus about wildlife in the area with questions that felt rehearsed, scripted, probing for specific information about large predator activity and unusual animal behavior. Marcus gave them standard tourist responses and watched them exchange glances that confirmed his suspicions. These weren't hikers, they were searchers. The drones appeared Thursday afternoon. Marcus first noticed the distinctive whine while checking a trail marker near Cascade Creek. The small aircraft hovered above the canopy, its camera gimbal rotating methodically as it surveyed the forest below. Marcus tracked it for 15 minutes, watching it follow a search pattern that covered the exact area where he'd found the creature. When he reported it to the station, his supervisor, Tom Davidson, dismissed it as probably some tech enthusiast or real estate surveyor. But Marcus caught something in Tom's expression, a flicker of concern that vanished too quickly. That same evening, Tom called Marcus into his office with a casualness that felt forced. The questions started simple enough, routine inquiries about patrol routes and wildlife observations. Then Tom's tone shifted, became more pointed. Had Marcus noticed anything unusual during his patrol on that cold night 3 days ago? Any signs of large predators? Bears, perhaps? Or mountain lions? Had he encountered any injured animals or heard distress calls that might indicate something worth investigating? Marcus kept his answers vague, professional, unremarkable. He mentioned checking some sounds that turned out to be elk. Nothing noteworthy, but Tom's questions revealed that someone had been asking about Marcus specifically, about his movements that night, about what he might have seen or documented. Tom wasn't conducting a routine follow-up. He was fishing for information on someone else's behalf. Friday morning brought visitors that transformed Marcus's unease into genuine alarm. 2 men in dark suits arrived at the ranger station asking for Tom, but their attention fixed immediately on Marcus when they spotted him refilling his coffee in the break room. They introduced themselves as agents from the Wildlife Conservation Bureau, an agency Marcus had never heard of despite 18 years in forest service. Their credentials looked official enough, but something about them felt wrong. Their questions about large predator sightings in the area were too specific, too focused on the exact sector where Marcus had made his discovery. They asked if any rangers had reported unusual tracks, vocalizations that didn't match known species, or evidence of animals exhibiting abnormal behavior patterns. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor while his instincts screamed warnings. These men knew something. Their questions weren't exploratory, they were confirmatory. They already had information and were testing whether Marcus would reveal what he knew. When they left, Marcus watched through the window as they sat in their sedan for 20 minutes, one of them speaking intensely on a phone while the other typed on a laptop. They were reporting back to someone. That evening, Marcus's personal computer began exhibiting problems he couldn't explain. Files wouldn't open properly. His internet browser history showed searches he hadn't conducted. The folder where he'd saved his initial notes about the encounter, carefully encrypted and password protected, had been corrupted. When he tried to restore from backup, he discovered his automatic backup system had been disabled 3 days earlier, right after his encounter. Marcus wasn't a technology expert, but he understood intrusion when he saw it. Someone had accessed his computer remotely, searched through his files, and eliminated anything they considered dangerous. The isolation strategy became apparent over the weekend. Marcus's patrol assignments, which he'd held consistently for 3 years, were suddenly changed. Tom handed him new routes on Monday morning, sectors on the opposite side of the forest from where the encounter had occurred. When Marcus questioned the change, Tom offered weak explanations about rotation policies and giving other rangers opportunities in different areas. But Marcus noticed his replacement on his old routes was Jake Morrison, a newer ranger who followed protocols rigidly and never questioned authority. Someone wanted Marcus away from that area, away from any possibility of another encounter or further evidence collection. The warning came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen, a fellow ranger Marcus had worked with for 6 years, approached him during lunch on Tuesday. Sarah was normally cheerful and talkative, but today she looked worried, almost frightened. She sat down across from Marcus in the empty break room and spoke quietly, her eyes darting toward the door. "People have been asking about you," Sarah said without preamble. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Sarah's tone carried genuine concern, maybe even fear. She leaned closer across the break room table, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "2 different groups," she continued. "The suits who came last week, and then others. Yesterday, a guy claiming to be a wildlife photographer spent 4 hours asking me questions about you. What routes you patrol, whether you're the type to report everything you see, if you've seemed different lately." Marcus, he wasn't a photographer. His camera was a prop. "I checked the model number later. It's been discontinued for 8 years. No professional would use it." Marcus absorbed this information, his mind racing through implications. Multiple groups tracking him meant the situation was more complex than he'd imagined. It wasn't just one agency trying to contain information. There were competing interests, different players with different agendas. "What did you tell them?" Marcus asked. "Nothing useful. That you're reliable, professional, keep to yourself." "But Marcus, be careful what you report. Whatever you saw out there, whatever you found, some very serious people want it buried." Sarah glanced toward the door again, then stood abruptly as footsteps approached in the hallway. She left without another word, passing Tom in the doorway with a forced smile. That evening, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't stay away from the encounter site, couldn't abandon the creature that had changed his understanding of the world. On his day off, he would return to that remote area, not as a ranger but as someone seeking answers. He needed to know if the creature had survived, if its injuries had healed, if it was safe. The compulsion went beyond professional curiosity. Marcus felt a responsibility, a connection he couldn't rationalize or dismiss. Thursday morning arrived cold and overcast. Marcus packed carefully, first aid supplies, water, high-calorie food, his personal camera instead of his phone. He'd learned his lesson about digital tracking. The camera was old, fully manual, with actual film that couldn't be remotely accessed or corrupted. He told no one where he was going, parked his truck 3 miles from his actual destination, and hiked in through terrain difficult enough to discourage casual followers. The forest felt different this time. Marcus had spent nearly 2 decades reading wilderness environments, sensing the subtle shifts in animal behavior that indicated predators or disturbances. Today, the forest felt watchful. Birds called their alarm sequences. Squirrels chittered warnings from high branches. Something was different here, something that had changed the baseline patterns Marcus knew intimately. He found them in a small clearing bordered by ancient cedars, a place where sunlight filtered through in golden columns. 3 of them. The creature he'd rescued was unmistakable despite the healing injuries, its distinctive gait now only slightly favored on the leg that had been trapped. But it wasn't alone. 2 others stood nearby, one slightly larger and broader through the shoulders, the other smaller and more slender. Family, Marcus realized. These were family members. The rescued creature saw Marcus first. Its reaction wasn't fear or aggression, but something closer to recognition, perhaps even welcome. It made a low vocalization, a rumbling sound that carried complex tones Marcus couldn't begin to interpret. The other 2 turned and Marcus froze, acutely aware of his vulnerability. 3 of these beings, each capable of incredible strength, and he was alone miles from help. But the larger one didn't approach threateningly. Instead, it moved with deliberate slowness, positioning itself between Marcus and the smaller creature in a protective stance that was unmistakable. The one Marcus had rescued stepped forward, closing the distance until only 15 feet separated them. It gestured, using its massive hands in ways that seemed intentional, purposeful. It pointed to its healing leg, then to Marcus, then made a sweeping motion that encompassed the forest around them. Marcus understood, or thought he did, gratitude, but also warning. The creature was trying to communicate something important, something urgent. It repeated the gesture sequence, more emphatically this time, then added something new. It pointed toward the direction Marcus had come from, then made a pushing motion as if urging him away. Danger, Marcus interpreted. The creature was warning him of danger. Acting on instinct, Marcus raised his camera. The creature watched him, seeming to understand the device's purpose. Instead of turning away or showing alarm, it stood straighter, almost posing. The larger one moved beside it, and together they presented themselves clearly in the dappled sunlight. Marcus shot an entire roll of film, 36 exposures capturing details that would be undeniable: the intelligent eyes, the intricate hand structure, the complex musculature that spoke of bipedal evolution, the family dynamic that demonstrated sophisticated social organization. The smaller creature approached cautiously, curiosity overcoming wariness. It reached out one hand, stopping just short of touching Marcus, mirroring the gesture the rescued creature had made during their first encounter. Marcus remained still, letting the moment unfold naturally. The creature's hand was enormous, capable of crushing strength, yet it moved with surprising delicacy. It touched Marcus's shoulder briefly, gently, then withdrew. The sound of breaking branches shattered the moment. The creature's heads snapped toward the noise, their bodies tensing instantly. The rescued one made an urgent grunting sound, and all 3 began moving away with remarkable speed and silence for beings of their size. But the rescued creature paused at the clearing's edge, looking back at Marcus with an expression he could only describe as concerned. Then, It vanished into the forest shadows. Marcus heard voices, multiple voices, coordinated and professional. He ran, using every skill he'd developed over 18 years of wilderness work. He moved through dense underbrush, crossed rocky streams to break his trail, doubled back, and circled through terrain he knew would be difficult to track. Behind him, he heard pursuit, organized, determined, equipped. These weren't casual hikers. They were trained, probably armed, definitely dangerous. Marcus pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel, thorns tearing at his jacket as the voices behind him grew more organized. They were spreading out, establishing a perimeter, cutting off escape routes with military precision. His lungs burned from the altitude and exertion, but he forced himself to keep moving, using every game trail and natural corridor he knew. The terrain here was treacherous, full of hidden ravines and unstable slopes that could break an ankle or worse. His pursuers would have to move more cautiously, giving him precious minutes. He emerged onto a ridge overlooking the valley where his truck was parked, still a mile away through dense forest. Through gaps in the trees, he spotted movement below, more vehicles arriving, blocking the access road. They'd anticipated his route, planned for this contingency. Marcus changed direction, heading instead toward an old fire road that few people remembered existed. His mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. These weren't poachers protecting their territory. This was coordinated, funded, official somehow. The men chasing him moved with tactical training, communicated through equipment that suggested government or military resources. The implications crashed over him like a wave. If official agencies were involved in pursuing him, then they'd known about the creatures all along. The illegal trap, the sophisticated camera system, the immediate response to his rescue of Walker, it all suggested something far larger than he'd imagined. Not just covering up a cryptid's existence, but actively managing it, controlling information, eliminating threats to secrecy. Marcus reached the fire road as twilight descended, making the forest treacherous with shadows. He'd lost his pursuers temporarily, but they had resources he couldn't match. Helicopters, thermal imaging, communications networks. He couldn't go home. His cabin would be the first place they'd look, probably already was being watched. His truck was compromised. His phone, he pulled it from his pocket and stared at it, realizing it was a tracking device leading them straight to him. He powered it down and buried it under a rotting log, knowing even that might not be enough. The temperature dropped rapidly as night fell. Marcus had his ranger gear, enough to survive comfortably in the wilderness for days if necessary, but survival wasn't the issue. The camera and its film were the issue. The evidence tucked in his jacket pocket represented proof that could change everything, and powerful forces clearly wanted that proof destroyed. He needed to secure it, hide it somewhere even a thorough search wouldn't find it. Somewhere he could retrieve it later if given the chance. He spent that night in a cave he'd discovered years ago, too small and remote to appear on any maps. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the distant sound of helicopters and the imagined noise of footsteps. His mind wouldn't stop analyzing, questioning, trying to understand the scope of what he'd stumbled into. How long had they known? How many people were involved in maintaining this secret? What happened to others who discovered the truth? Dawn brought no comfort, only the realization that he couldn't run forever. Marcus made his way cautiously back towards civilization, staying off trails, moving through the densest cover. He reached the outskirts of his property by mid-morning, approaching from the forested side rather than the road. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. His cabin was surrounded, not by local police or even state troopers, but by a force that seemed absurdly disproportionate to any crime he could have committed. Vehicles from Oregon State Police, Washington State Patrol, and Idaho State Police created a perimeter around his property. He counted at least 30 officers, maybe more, with tactical units positioned strategically. A mobile command center sat in his driveway, its satellite dishes and antennas suggesting sophisticated communications capability. 2 helicopters circled overhead, and he spotted K-9 units being prepared. Marcus's stomach dropped. This wasn't an arrest. This was a siege. They were treating him like a domestic terrorist, a dangerous fugitive, someone who posed a threat significant enough to justify this overwhelming response. He watched from the concealment of dense undergrowth as officers moved with practiced efficiency, establishing positions, coordinating through headsets, preparing for a long standoff. A loudspeaker crackled to life, the voice amplified and authoritative. "Marcus Webb, "This is Oregon State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest. Exit the cabin with your hands visible. You have 5 minutes to comply before we enter the structure." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. He wasn't in the cabin. They were surrounding an empty building, playing out a procedure for something that wasn't happening. But the charges they announced made his blood run cold. Theft of government property, interference with federal research, possession of biological materials from endangered species. Each charge was fabricated, but each carried serious prison time. They were building a case that would destroy his credibility, paint him as a criminal, ensure that anything he said about creatures in the forest would be dismissed as the ravings of a convicted felon. The 5 minutes passed. Marcus watched as tactical teams approached his cabin, breaching the door with practiced efficiency. They'd find nothing inside except the normal possessions of a forest ranger living alone. His evidence was with him, the camera and film secured in a waterproof bag tucked inside his jacket. But they'd search thoroughly, tear his home apart looking for anything that could connect him to the encounter. An hour into the standoff, a vehicle arrived that changed the dynamic. Unmarked, black, official in a way that suggested federal authority. 2 people emerged, a woman in her 50s wearing a business suit inappropriate for the forest setting, and a younger man carrying a briefcase. They spoke briefly with the incident commander, and Marcus saw the state police officer's body language change, becoming deferential, almost submissive. The woman approached the command center, and moments later, the loudspeaker announcement changed tone. "Marcus Webb, this is Director Catherine Vance with the Department of Interior. We need to talk. This situation can be resolved peacefully, but you need to make contact. Use the emergency frequency on your Ranger radio." Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his radio, then stopped. Making contact meant revealing his position, beginning negotiations that could only end one way. But the alternative was remaining a fugitive, hunted through forests he'd dedicated his life to protecting. He thought of Walker, of the family group, of the warning they'd tried to give him. They'd known this was coming, understood the danger better than he had. Marcus made his decision. Staying hidden would only delay the inevitable and potentially escalate the situation into violence. He keyed his radio to the emergency frequency, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "This is Marcus Webb. I'm not in the cabin. I'm observing from a safe distance. Before I make myself visible, I need assurances that this won't end with me being shot." The response came within seconds. Director Vance's voice calm and professional. "Mr. Webb, you have my word that no one will harm you if you approach peacefully. We're not here to hurt you. We're here because you've stumbled into something that requires careful management. Come to the command center. We need to have a conversation that's long overdue." 30 minutes later, Marcus sat in the back of a mobile command vehicle. Still in handcuffs despite Vance's assurances of safety, the interior was equipped with sophisticated communication equipment, multiple screens showing aerial footage of the surrounding area, and detailed topographical maps marked with symbols Marcus didn't recognize. Vance sat across from him, her expression neither hostile nor friendly, simply evaluating. "You're probably wondering why 3 state police agencies and federal resources are focused on one forest ranger who helped an injured animal," Vance began, her tone suggesting she was stating facts rather than asking questions. "The truth is more complex than you imagine, Mr. Webb. What you encountered 4 nights ago wasn't just an injured animal. It was a member of a species that officially doesn't exist, and your intervention has compromised a protection program that's been operating since 1967. Marcus felt his skepticism warring with the evidence of his own experience. "Protection program? You're telling me the government knows about these creatures and has been hiding them for over 50 years? Vance nodded, opening a folder that contained photographs Marcus recognized immediately. Walker, his distinctive facial features and the injury to his leg clearly visible. But these weren't Marcus's photos. These were taken from different angles, different times, showing Walker and his family group in various locations throughout the forest. The surveillance had been comprehensive and ongoing. "We prefer the term management rather than hiding," Vance continued. "When the Patterson-Gimlin film was released in '67, it created exactly the kind of public interest we'd feared. Hunting parties, researchers, curiosity seekers flooding into habitats that had remained undisturbed for thousands of years. The decision was made at the highest levels to implement a program that would protect the species while maintaining public skepticism about their existence." She pulled out more documents, official reports with classification stamps, budget allocations hidden within other programs, organizational charts showing a network spanning multiple agencies. We estimate the current population across North America is between 2,000 and 3,000 individuals, mostly concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, but with smaller populations in the Appalachians, the Northern Rockies, and remote areas of Canada. They're intelligent, Mr. Webb. Not human-level intelligence, but far beyond any known primate. They have social structures, communication systems, even what appears to be cultural transmission of knowledge between generations. Marcus absorbed this information, his mind reeling with implications. If you're protecting them, why the illegal traps? Why was Walker caught in military-grade equipment? Vance's expression darkened. That's where our problems begin. Not everyone agrees with the protection approach. There are corporate interests that see the species as a biological goldmine. Their unique physiology, their adaptation to extreme environments, their apparent resistance to diseases that affect humans. Genetic research companies, pharmaceutical corporations, even defense contractors interested in their strength and sensory capabilities. The trap that caught Walker was set by operatives working for Helix Biogen, a company that's been trying to acquire specimens for years. She leaned forward, her intensity increasing. Your rescue of Walker disrupted their operation and drew attention to an area we've worked hard to keep secure. The photos you took, the evidence you collected, the fact that you documented everything with the thoroughness of an experienced ranger, all of it creates risk. If that information reaches the public, if it's compelling enough to reignite serious interest, we lose our ability to protect them. Marcus thought of the memory card hidden in his cabin, now certainly discovered during the search. So you're here to silence me, fabricated charges, imprisonment, discrediting anything I might say. That's one option, Vance admitted, but it's not the option I prefer. I've reviewed your record, Mr. Webb. 18 years of exemplary service, multiple commendations for wildlife protection, known for your tracking skills and your respect for the natural world. The way you approached Walker, the care you took in freeing him despite the danger, it tells me something about your character. She opened another folder, this one containing what appeared to be employment documents. I'm offering you a choice. Join the program. Use your skills to protect the species you've already demonstrated you care about. You'd continue your ranger duties as cover, but your real work would be monitoring and safeguarding the population in this region. You'd have resources, support, access to decades of research. You'd be part of something that matters. Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him, and if I refuse, then the charges proceed. You'll be convicted, imprisoned, your reputation destroyed. When you eventually tell your story, you'll be dismissed as a bitter ex-ranger with a criminal record making wild claims. The evidence we found in your cabin will disappear into classified storage. Walker and his family will be relocated to a more secure area, and you'll spend the next decade in a federal facility wondering if you made the right choice. The vehicle fell silent, except for the hum of electronic equipment. Marcus thought of Walker's eyes, the intelligence and awareness he'd seen there. He thought of the family group, the way they'd moved through the forest with grace and purpose. He thought of what public knowledge might mean for them, the hunting parties and researchers and corporations that would descend on their habitat like locusts. I want to see the facility, Marcus said finally. I want proof that this program actually protects them rather than exploits them. If you're telling the truth, if this is genuine protection, then we can talk about my involvement. Vance smiled for the first time, an expression of satisfaction and perhaps relief. I was hoping you'd say that. The helicopter is ready whenever you are. The helicopter banked sharply over a ridge, revealing a valley Marcus had never seen on any map. Below, nestled among old-growth forest and natural rock formations, sprawled a facility that seemed to emerge organically from the landscape itself. Buildings designed to blend with the terrain, roads disguised as game trails, the entire complex invisible from above unless you knew exactly where to look. As they descended, Marcus counted at least a dozen structures, each camouflaged with such precision that only the movement of personnel gave away their locations. The landing pad was surrounded by trees that he realized were actually sophisticated concealment structures. When the helicopter settled and the rotors began to wind down, Vance gestured toward the main building. "Welcome to Cascade Station," she said, one of 7 facilities across North America dedicated to species protection and research. Inside, the facility transformed from wilderness camouflage to cutting-edge research center. Scientists moved between laboratories equipped with technology Marcus had never seen. Monitors displayed real-time data from hundreds of tracking points across the mountain range. A wall-sized map showed population distributions, migration patterns, and threat assessments updated continuously. Dr. James Morrison, the facility's lead researcher, greeted them with genuine warmth. Silver-haired and weathered, he had the look of someone who'd spent decades in the field. "Mr. Webb, I've been hoping to meet you since we heard about Walker's rescue. What you did, the way you approached the situation, it demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment we need in field operatives." Over the next hours, Morrison walked Marcus through the program's scope. The Bigfoot population numbered between 2,000 and 3,000 individuals, concentrated primarily in the Pacific Northwest, but with smaller groups scattered across remote regions of the continent. Each family group was monitored through non-invasive tracking, their health and movements documented with meticulous care. "We don't capture them," Morrison explained, showing Marcus medical equipment designed for field treatment. "We've developed relationships over decades. They come to us when injured or ill. We provide care, then they return to their territories. It's built on trust, not coercion." The medical bay contained evidence of that trust. Photographs showed researchers treating injuries, providing medications, even assisting with difficult births. The creatures in the images showed no signs of restraint or fear. Instead, Marcus saw cooperation, even what appeared to be gratitude. Then Morrison led him to an observation room overlooking a large, naturalistic enclosure. Marcus's breath caught as he recognized the massive figure moving among the trees. Walker looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. The creature's leg was bandaged professionally. His movements still showed some stiffness, but he was clearly healing well. When Walker saw Marcus, he approached the glass and placed one massive hand against it. Marcus stepped forward and matched the gesture from his side. "He's been asking about you," Morrison said quietly. "In his way. They have methods of communication we're still learning to fully understand, but the intent is clear. He wanted to know if you were safe." Marcus felt emotion tightening his throat. "I thought I was saving him. Turns out he was worried about saving me." "That's their nature," Morrison replied. "Deeply social, profoundly empathetic. They understand reciprocity and relationship in ways that put most humans to shame." Walker knew that helping you meant you'd helped him. He wanted to ensure you weren't harmed because of it. Vance joined them at the glass. "The trap that caught Walker wasn't random. Helix Biogen has been attempting to acquire specimens for 3 years. They want to study the species' remarkable disease resistance, their longevity, their strength. In corporate hands, that knowledge becomes proprietary, weaponized, commercialized. The creatures become resources to exploit rather than beings to protect. We stop those operations," Morrison added. "We monitor illegal activity, intercept attempts at capture, provide counterintelligence when necessary. It's not just about studying them, Mr. Webb. It's about standing between them and those who would destroy them for profit." Marcus watched Walker move back into the enclosure's forest area, his gait improving even in the short time Marcus had been watching. "What happens to him now?" "He returns to his family group once he's fully healed," Vance said. "Probably within the week. They're in a secure area we've maintained for 2 decades. Walker serves as a liaison of sorts, one of the few who willingly maintains regular contact with us. He understands that we're allies." "And my role would be?" Morrison pulled up a map showing Marcus's ranger territory. "You'd continue your official duties, but you'd also serve as primary field protection for the population in this region. You'd monitor for threats, provide early warning of human encroachment, coordinate with us when medical intervention is needed. You'd be their guardian, Mr. Webb, the position you've essentially already proven yourself perfect for." Marcus studied the map, seeing his familiar territory in an entirely new context. Every remote valley and hidden ridge suddenly held new meaning. "I have one condition," he said finally. "If this program ever shifts from protection to exploitation, if it becomes about control rather than conservation, I reserve the right to expose everything. I won't be part of imprisoning them or using them." Vance and Morrison exchanged glances. "That's exactly the kind of ethical backbone we need," Vance said. "Agreed. The moment this becomes something other than protection, you have our blessing to burn it all down." Marcus extended his hand. "Then I'm in." 3 days later, Marcus stood on his cabin porch at dawn, watching mist rise from the valley below. The charges had been publicly dropped, explained away as administrative error and mistaken identity. His cabin had been returned to him, now equipped with encrypted communications equipment hidden in plain sight. His ranger duties continued as before, but now every patrol carried additional purpose. He'd begun learning the signs of Bigfoot presence that he'd previously overlooked, the subtle markers of their passage through the forest. Walker's family group had accepted his presence, allowing him to observe from respectful distances. The memory card with his original photos had been destroyed, but Marcus found he didn't mourn its loss. He had something far more valuable now: purpose, connection, and the knowledge that he was protecting something precious and irreplaceable. As sunrise painted the mountains gold, Marcus spotted movement at the forest edge. Walker emerged briefly from the trees, his leg fully healed, and raised one hand in what could only be described as a wave. Marcus returned the gesture, smiling. He'd stumbled into one of Earth's greatest mysteries and found his life's true calling. Some secrets, he now understood, were worth keeping. Not all truths were meant for public consumption. Sometimes protection required silence, and wisdom meant knowing when to speak and when to guard. Marcus picked up his ranger pack and headed toward his truck. Another patrol awaited, but now he walked as guardian of a hidden world, protector of a species that had survived by remaining unseen. It was work that would continue for the rest of his life, dangerous and demanding and absolutely essential. As he drove into the forest, Marcus felt more at peace than he had in years. He'd found where he belonged, standing watch over the boundary between the known world and the mysteries that still endured in the wild places. And he would ensure those mysteries remained protected, whatever the cost.